it's working.
Hi, I'm Janae Domenico. I work for the marine megafauna in Mozambique, Africa, and I also am.
Can you guys all see this?
Yeah, and we can hear it too.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you.
SDG Hub's manager for the Global Collabs. Today for the all hands meeting, I'm going to walk everyone through the PowerPoint, how to manage a project. And I'm pre-recording this just in case we have any technical difficulties. So let me share my screen and get started with you. Okay, here we have a PowerPoint presentation that our friend Yasmin put together. She works for the Global Changemakers and it's project management for social impact. We have borrowed this with her permission and we are cutting it down just a little bit to fit into our time block. Okay, when we are starting anything, it's very important to go back to basics. Even here in Mozambique, when I'm talking about a whale shark, we always start with the very basics. What is a shark, right? So here we are, project management. What is a project? We want to define the project as projects being temporary efforts that create value through unique products, unique services, or a result. As everyone who is involved with the SDG hubs might recognize, here are the Sustainable Developmental Goals as established by the United Nations. Each hub is focusing on a different goal, right? So we have the Zero Hunger Hub, we have the Gender Equality Hub, we have the Racial Justice Hub. Although the projects in each of these hubs will vary and quite often be wildly different than one another, at the core of all this project management, we can have the same sort of skeleton, the same sort of setup. So when you speak about project management, you can think about this beautiful triangle with this 3 tiers. So we have the cost and resources of a project, the scope or quality of this project, and then the time/timeline of this project. So it doesn't really matter what the project will be and the end result being something wildly different in one hub to the other. At its foundational core, we can have a very similar structure here. And these aspects will also be changing probably wildly based on a lot of different variables, such as where you are in the country or the world, what your target audience is going to be, and what your specific project goals are. So when you have a project,
Linda, I don't know if you know this, but we stopped the video. Linda, you're muted as well.
We can't hear the video.
Linda, I can't hear you.
Sorry, that was my fault. I was trying to mute myself because we have background noise here, but let me go back. Sorry about that. We will start right here. Okay.
at the end of that project. And there's lots of different ways a project can end.
So we're going to just go back a tad here, just so you can.
What your target audience is going to be and what your specific project goals are. So when you have a project, they can be planned through these very generic overarching terms for the project phases. The very first phase being project identification and design, the second phase being project setup. And then we get in a bit of a loop where we take our planned project and implement it in actual reality into the communities. And as you're doing so, maybe you have to tweak it, maybe you have adjustments. So then we kind of start this cyclical process of planning, implementing, back to the drawing board, implementing again, until we get a more perfect project. And eventually we end up at the end of that project. And there's lots of different ways a project can end. So we're going to dive deeper into each of these just a little bit. So phase one, identification. Narrow down our ideas to make sure this is the right project for the right audience. So the right project is one that is going to be addressing the needs of the community that will benefit from that project. The right project is one that considers all the important stakeholders involved. So who is involved in this project? What can they bring to the table? What do they get out of it? How are they affected, et cetera? And finally, is this project aligned with your team's goals and values and motivations? For example, here at the Marine Megafauna Foundation, we deal with ocean whale sharks, manta rays, and ocean communities. But in this community specifically, we also have other problems that might be related to the ocean, but wouldn't be our area of specialties. And for instance, there's a lot of community health work in the area. And there's a lot of projects that help raise awareness about AIDS, for instance. And even though I think that's an amazing project and I would love to help, funneling it through the Marine Megafauna Foundation doesn't make sense. So we do want to make sure that we have these great ideas and that we sort of plan out where would that idea fit best, in what community, with what stakeholders, and with what organization. When you're talking about addressing the community's needs, there are a few different ways that you can define their needs. And here are some examples of that. The normative needs are comparing that your target community being the population that you are directly affecting or aiming your project towards. So comparing that population to the professional standards, or you can have comparative needs that's going to compare that specific population, your target population, to other populations that are in a similar situation and compare where they're at versus where your population is at. A felt need, which is a need that's been identified by an outside observer, and you're just watching the feelings and interactions of that community within their own situation. And then we have expressed needs, which is really literal, and where the community expresses exactly what the needs are that they have in that community. So it's important also to just identify what the needs are and what type of needs they are. So that's the project identification and design, and we move on to project setup. When you're setting up a project, it's really helpful to think of it in the scope of the theory of change. So we'll go over it, kind of the steps, and then I have a couple more infographics to help bring it full picture. With the theory of change, the first step you have are the inputs, and that's going to be materials and information that you and your team are going to be able to produce. And these are usually like tangible nouns. You're going to have a social media account. You're going to have a needs assessment survey that you will be doing within the community, which you will provide the pens and paper of that survey, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have the activities. So this is going to be the products or services that you, as the group that's running the project, is going to be provided. So this is more of, instead of tangible nouns like we just had, they're going to be verbs, right? We're going to perform XYZ or provide XYZ. We'll be creating this or delivering that. And the more descriptive it is, the better it's going to be for you stacking up your plans. Outputs are going to be the direct effects that are caused by the activities. So this is going to have X amount of people are becoming trained in whatever the activity is, or we're going to have a community that will be growing in this way. The next step is outcomes, and that's going to be short-term effects. So it's the direct effect of your activity. And then we have the impact, and that's a long-term effect of the activity. So to make it hit home a little better, because I think this is a lot, we have this theory of change template. And I don't want my face to get in the way, so I'm going to minimize that. So we have, you can see the inputs leading over to the activities, over to outputs. And here's a very specific example. This example is going to be this project idea of offering adults literacy courses. Okay, so the inputs, the things that this project is putting on this event, they have the facilities, they have the places that they can hold these literacy courses at. They have the trainers who can provide, the expertise, and they have the materials. The activity itself is going to be a literacy training course delivered. Output is going to be adults completing literacy courses, and the direct outcome is going to be increased literacy. And the overall broader picture impact will be better jobs and increased incomes for these people who have their increased literacy. And when you're doing this theory, it's important to also understand that this is true based on assumptions you are making. So here's some assumptions that are being made in this particular project. We are making the assumption that adults will complete literacy courses because adults want to be literate. And we are predicting the outcome of increased literacy based on the assumption that participants are learning from the training. And our overall broad impact term is assumed that they will have better jobs and increased incomes because of the assumption that the participants, once they grow their skills, will continue on to apply for and get new jobs. An important part of this planning is to ask yourself, how will you make sure that you have all the inputs you need? And, sometimes you might have the inputs already, and sometimes you might have a need for those inputs. And knowing those needs and identifying them will help make the pathway to ensuring you have those better. So the more defined everything is, the better your chances are. And fundraising is a really effective way, especially when you have a strategy, you have some passion behind it, so you're able to be very persuasive. Good persuasive speech goes far in fundraising initiatives. And almost a more guaranteed success factor in fundraising would be that you're asking for money that will do X, Y, Z instead of just X. And if you can show that money contributing to this project will go farther, will stretch farther, will touch more lives, will have a bigger ripple effect, I think it's much more likely to be successful. So speaking of fundraising, there's quite a few different ways to get money. So here's just a couple examples, and why this might not be relevant today for some of the hubs. It's also like a fantastic skill to at least be comfortable with, like at a base level of what you're understanding, especially if kind of these social projects are something you're passionate about and wish to continue. So we've got crowdfunding. In-kind donations is when someone is supporting you, not necessarily with direct cash, but the objects you actually need. Like when people donate actual laptops to my project for the staff instead of money to buy laptops. Grants are fantastic. They can be public or private, and you have, unlike a loan, you're not going to have to pay them back. And sometimes they're stipulated, you must do X, Y, Z with this money, and sometimes they're completely free. Corporate sponsorships, I think we all know about that. Anyone from like top athlete to an actress to famous people on TikTok. Corporate sponsorships are where you have a corporation who is agreeing to support you as long as they can be associated with either the person running the program or the program itself in a sort of win-win PR sense. And then we have social businesses where you have enterprises who are maximizing profits, where those profits are specifically used to fund social programs. Now you get to phase 3 and 4, which is like a washer machine of sorts, planning and implementation. And we already touched on it a little bit, where you're in the planning phase and then you implement it, and then you are flexible and adjustable. And you can see sometimes that what you thought was going to work on paper might not work in reality as well as you'd hoped. But by observing, you can decide, if we just shift this a little bit or tweak it a little bit more, then we can have a more perfect project. How to help yourself in project planning for this implementation. It can be overwhelming. You have the idea, you've identified your source, and you've planned it out on paper. But there are tools to help reduce it a little bit to make everything seem more tangible, one of those tools is just called the breakdown structure. You can do this for a project, you can do it for a personal goal, and it's essentially, I mean, you can do this with your steak, right? You just cut it up into smaller and smaller pieces until it becomes easier to digest. So here we have an example of a construction of a house. And the idea of like, I'm going to build a house could be extremely overwhelming, but you can cut that down into smaller pieces, right? So we've got the internal, the foundation, and the external. Those are still broad categories. So you can in turn cut those down into even smaller pieces, as you see here. And if those still feel too big, you can again cut each of these smaller steps into even smaller steps until you have, without a doubt, the knowledge of exactly what needs to happen and how it's going to happen. And by tackling those small steps, you are inevitably running your project smoother and you're getting closer to your goal. Another tip is a Gantt chart. Honestly, the marine megafauna, we use this all the time, and it's essentially just a chart where you can see what activities are you doing and what is the timeline for that activity. What you need to do, when you need to do it, and what tasks are overlapping. I found this Gantt chart that directly relates to building a house. So I thought I would share it with you again, since we just talked about the house we're all going to build together. So again, there's the task names, the duration of how long you think that task will start, a start date and end date, and then essentially a long Excel sheet made into a calendar form where you can see the overlapping tasks, how long it should take, when they should end. The end of one task usually means the start of another. This is also really helpful for if you fall behind at all, so you can automatically shift everything forward and give you a realistic expectation of what the rest of your tasks will look like. Another useful tool for project planning is this matrix. And this is a hilarious example because it's Lord of the Rings. But you can see here, RACI. The RACI matrix stands for responsibility, accountability, consulted, and informed. So the others were project timelines, breaking down the activity. This one's for the specific people involved in the project, so you can know who is responsible for what task, who is accountable for what task, who is merely just consulted, and who's been informed. So it's really important when project planning to nail these details down so that when you're in the middle of your project, there's not confusion about who's supposed to do what, or when, or where. So these RACI matrices are just another useful tool for even more organization. I really don't think you can be over organized. And the more you plan and organize, the smoother your event's gonna go. All right, the next organizational tip is having a MEAL person or a MEAL officer. MEAL stands for monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learnings. And to be honest, MEAL duties or MEAL officers' jobs, they are very broad and encompass a lot, as you can see. Everything from the inputs to the data collections to the management, tracking the financials. But this kind of list of what you should be checking on as far as monitoring, checking on as far as evaluating, checking on as far as accountability, and checking on as far as learning. These are all just really great things to keep in mind and try to follow up on as much as possible to, again, get your project closer and closer to being like a successful project that has the outcomes that you desire. And lastly, so we're running a project, we're super planned, we're super organized, and it's really important to keep an open heart and mind and will. So I know you can get, from experience, caught up in the details or the planning, or even the objectives and the timeline. Falling behind seems really stressful when you're in the middle of it. But we want to make sure that we go into these communities and remember that we're there to help them and that this is like a beautiful thing that everyone's doing, right? So we have these change makers, they are going into the community, they are doing these great, amazing actions. And we want to have a lot of empathy with people in the project. We want to make sure that we're listening and that we're growing. We remain flexible. And I think flexibility is probably key. Flexibility and communication up there, top key things for me. Being able to be open to new ideas and be adaptable for changing. These things are other important factors that you can focus on in your own self, in your own mind, and in your own heart. All right, we've done the ID, we've done the setup, we have planned and implemented and planned some more. And eventually these projects come to a close. And there's a few different ways that they would come to a close. So we'll just briefly go over that. We've got a really literal end to the project called the end of a project, right? So when it's the end, the project is ending. And I know this sounds kind of funny and repetitive, but projects don't always end with you. Sometimes you can hand them off. Sometimes they get extended, either an extended timeline or they grow and they get grown to scale. But focusing on the end, it just means the project is over, the timeline's over. This project will not be continuing in any way after this end date. There's going to be final reports, and it's kind of the final end. So being able to identify what type of end it is important. Moving on to transferring is where maybe you did a project and someone else is coming in to take over it, be it, for instance, with the hubs, maybe younger members, or maybe it's grown so successfully that another NGO wants to come in and we pass it off to them. Maybe it's been extended. So maybe the gardening project was really, really great as a pilot project. And we've decided that we're going to do, increase everything by 20% and add on an additional 2 years to it. Extend and expand kind of go hand in hand, but expanding would be more like new regions. For example, in Mozambique, I work in Inhambane province, which is kind of like saying in the United States, I work in Colorado, but we want to extend the project to Kansas and Oklahoma. And then there's a redesign. So maybe your project came to a close and you learned a lot. And sometimes the project won't end how you want it to, or it will teach you things that you never thought it would. And, all data is valuable data, right? So you can take everything you learned from it and completely revamp it or turn it into something completely different that you never would have known had you not done the first project. So these are a few ways to continue / end a project. And it's important to identify how you see your project coming to a close so that while you're in the middle of it, this isn't an open-ended question. Okay, that ends my cut down version of this amazing PowerPoint by our friend Yasmin. And hopefully I am with you guys live to answer any questions. But if not, you have my email and you can contact me anytime. I hope you find this helpful. All right.
Okay. That was amazing. Really amazing. Okay. It's past time for our meeting to be over, everybody. So I'd like to say thank you for coming. I don't know if anybody wants to share their screen. This has been a fabulous gathering. Can we get a group picture? Anybody, do you guys want to show your pictures, your faces? Everybody, come on, real fast. We'll do this real fast and then you're going to be excused. Okay. Sarah, Satari, Kirsten, Fatima, Alexis. Okay. We don't have time to talk about this, but Janae did an amazing job. This is going to go on our TeenStream website skills. Every single skills training that we do is up on our website for everybody to watch. And so I'm going to stop recording. Okay.